last May, and I hope you will help me today and through this session welcome my new LA, Maddie Horman, and Rachel Johnson, who is joining us in Scruffham. And we're going to have a contest sometime this session determining, and we'll have a winner, how to pronounce that acronym. There's lots of different ways, and we'll see who wins. I say Scruffham. Senator Weber has a new a new LA. Do you want to introduce Owen?
Yes, my new LA is Owen Newberger, and Owen was here earlier. I think he had to head back to the office.
Okay.
But anyway, thank you.
But I hope you will also welcome him. And then we have 3 pages, and they're standing right back there, new to the Tax Committee. They'll also be paging for Senator Klein's committee, Commerce, also meeting in this room, and also Senator Latz's committee, Judiciary. And that is Ellie Lissick and Jude Nair and Mahalia Norton. So welcome. And then Senator Putnam's new intern is joining us today. If you'd stand up, Mason. This is Mason Beerbaum. Are there other new staff that anyone here has that you'd like the rest of the committee to become familiar with? Okay, so we still haven't fixed our technical problems, but so just chat or something, whatever you do when you don't have to be here.
Jack is talking to Sis right now. Jack is talking to Sis right now. Set up.
Okay. We can. Good morning, everyone. I call to order this hearing of the Minnesota Senate Taxes Committee, Wednesday, February 14th, at approximately 9:45 a.m. The quorum is present. We have two members who are potentially participating online, Senator Dietzick and Senator Miller. Will, if we need to hear from them or whatever, we will make sure that we ascertain they actually are present. So our first order of business is adoption of the minutes. They're in your packets. Are there any corrections to the minutes? Seeing none, they stand approved as presented. Our next item is a presentation on artificial intelligence. As some of you know, this past summer and fall, I became enamored of this topic and its potential for creating more efficiency, more effectiveness, more efficaciousness, 3 E's, for employees in government. And we contacted, Mr. Bergeron and I contacted Minute and had the pleasure of meeting the commissioner who will be speaking, Mr. John Eichten, and Mr. Brandon Hirsch, who has really helped to facilitate all of the interactions we've had with members, with businesses, with labor representatives, with anyone who would sit down and talk with us about the possibilities. We know that there are, one of the reactions to AI is fear, and there are plenty of us who are going to listen to legislation that ties to protect our employees, that protects the public, that protects public officials, but that is not my focus. My focus is on the possibilities and to make sure that we are maximizing and optimizing our efforts for ethical use of so-called artificial intelligence. Some people consider that a misleading term, but that is what it's commonly called, so we will continue to call it that. In your packets are is one article from Tax Notes, which talks about how to tax artificial intelligence or our programs or whatever you want to call them. And they refer to it in the article, the ghost that's inside a software program. That's what artificial intelligence is. And like good taxers, we are going to be looking for ways to tax it because it is not like software. It is not a product. It is the other. So I recommend that to you. We had hoped to also, it's very readable, by the way, and we had also hoped to provide you with an article that had been provided to me by Commissioner King on on behalf of the TAC from the Wall Street Journal, and we had made copies, and then we read in the upper thing that it's copyright protected. So we couldn't even provide you a link because the link has now expired. But if you can find it someplace, it is excellent for a general educated audience. And it answers questions like this before we get to our presentation. I really don't understand artificial intelligence and where it's heading. Please explain what it is. What about those chatbot AI systems? How can these new AIs answer almost any type of question? What are the implications of this for average citizens? I don't know whether to be uneasy, frightened, or welcoming. What about hallucinations? When an AI makes up something but presents it as a fact. Some people might use that to describe politicians, by the way. What are AI providers doing to minimize hallucinations? Do chatbots warn people about the possibility of giving bad information? What about people using AI to create phony news reports, photos, or videos? That's where we have done some legislation in the past. And can it be stopped? Wouldn't it be better if we could see the sources AIs use in their responses, like footnotes or citations in a report? What other measures should be considered to help us discern the quality of the information AI produces? Would some type of rating system work? Executives from Google, Microsoft, OpenAI, and other experts warned publicly in 2023 about the dangers of AI. What do they fear? In March 2023, many in the AI industry signed a statement calling for a pause in moving ahead with ever more powerful versions. Did that pause happen? Some say governments need to regulate AI to make it as safe as possible. What might that look like? I've heard of a doomsday speculation about AI, but what are some of the ways it is doing good? And the answers to that question are the purpose and intention of this hearing. So with that, I would like to welcome Commissioner Tarek Tomes, the Commissioner and State Chief Information Officer of Minute, and Brian Hirsch, who is the Government Relations Officer for Minute. Gentlemen, welcome to the committee. If you would identify yourself for the tape.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Tarek Tomes. I am the Commissioner of Minnesota IT Services. And
Commissioner Tomes, you're going to have to speak. These mics are not close enough to our faces, so you need to lean into it if you don't mind.
I can absolutely do that. Good morning, Madam Chair, committee members. For the record, my name is Tarek Tomes, and I am the Commissioner of Minnesota IT Services and the Chief Information Officer for the state of Minnesota. And I'm excited to be here this morning to both give a little bit of background and share our views and vision for this really important space. And Senator Rest, I really just want to say your interest in this area, you're really leaning in and learning about the various opportunities as well as the dangers, and what you see as the opportunities is really incredibly admirable and quite frankly very, very motivating for many of us as it relates to this really important topic.
And Commissioner, I am going to just interrupt a moment. The slides that the Commissioner has in front of us on the screen, we don't have a big enough screen to make them completely readable, but the slides are in your package if you want to follow along there, members. Commissioner Tomes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One of the things, maybe just starting off that I would like to share is while the dangers of artificial intelligence and what we see must certainly be respected, the opportunities are immense. The opportunities to change the way government functions, the way we serve people, the opportunities to really ultimately change lives in many incredibly positive manners. Certainly a new field has spawned, new language. Madam Chair just shared what we refer to as prompt engineering, the ability to ask questions of these generative tools, terms such as generative AI, terms such as large language models, and so we have this new lexicon that has come about. I thought it would be valuable maybe to just go back. I've been fortunate to have a 30-year career in technology that dates back quite some time over various organizations and many private sector organizations. And I also majored in computer science way back when, and this predates the internet, so it is literally way back when. And I can honestly say that from the beginning of my time both studying in this field as well as the beginning of my career, the terms artificial intelligence were pervasive and always there. They were a part of the subject matter that was taught and certainly a matter of the conversation. And that's a long-winded way of saying that artificial intelligence is not new. Certainly the breakthroughs that we've seen in the last 12 to 24 months are very different and are accelerating at an enormous pace. But artificial intelligence really dates back almost to the beginning of computing, to the 1950s. Sometimes we bifurcate the artificial intelligence space, if you will, into three broad categories. Artificial intelligence, which sometimes can be viewed as just mimicking the tasks that we perform and an ability to analyze complex data and then make decisions. Machine learning, really over the last couple of decades, a really huge area, the ability for machines and algorithms to study data and then make determinations and inferences to further highlight patterns and things that are seen within that data without further programming and coding. So basically learning data and then making further inferences about data. And then we sometimes talk about deep learning. And examples of deep learning, for example, are autonomous vehicles. The ability to take complex, unstructured, unforeseen situations and make decisions from a computing perspective. Going back a little bit, maybe just to give a few examples, in the 1950s, a robotic mouse created to navigate a maze on its own, and other evolutions that surely everyone would recognize are examples like speech recognition. I think a couple of decades ago, many people were familiar with the chess masters playing against a computer and the challenge of can a computer beat the world's foremost chess master, and things like image recognition. AI is really prevalent in all of our daily lives in many, many different ways, and has been. Everything from voice assistants, Siri on iPhones, Alexa on devices, the ability to recognize your voice and then make decisions to turn the lights on in your house or turn the lights off in your house, or various things, online recommendations. And I won't go through this list. One of my personal favorites from certainly over the last 5 to 10 years is when there is a recommendation made from just looking at my photos, and a movie is created with memories of a past trip, maybe something that happened with my kids 5 or 10 years ago, and certainly that has added to my life to be able to wake up at a really unforeseen time and receive this notification that, hey, here's a memory from your past that seems to be getting better and better and better. It's just a small example of the prevalence of AI in our daily lives, and we certainly see that in so many different aspects. If anyone has traveled to any of the places and seen autonomous vehicles at work, certainly a lot of the things that we see in space travel related to automated systems or autopilot in automobiles, in airlines, many examples of the prevalence of artificial intelligence in our daily lives. The data on this next slide, I think, is really important for government, and certainly represents a view that we have at Minnesota IT Services and that many across the executive branch share. And I think the data itself has to be validated, but I think there is absolutely directionally concurrence that productivity for a workforce, for people, as a workforce tool is undeniable. 29% faster in completing tasks. 85% of users that have AI assistants accelerate first drafts of writing something and then edit from there. 55% increase in productivity for computer programmers, and we have work going in that space and many different trials that give AI tools to programmers, for example, and allow them to generate code faster. And I think what that is really important to view, and sometimes we talk about AI from the perspective of everyday AI versus game-changing AI, and the things and the benefits in these use cases really would, I think, fall into the category of everyday AI. An opportunity to increase the productivity of our workforce and to put a tool in their hands that allows them to do their jobs, which oftentimes the workload that they're faced with is much more than they can actually accomplish. The demands from providing the various government services that are being asked for and actually turning those around in a timely manner and providing that opportunity for employees is really significant. Another area that I think is really important is I think many people entering the workforce or in the current workforce will seek out employment opportunities where these tools are available to them, and they will exit organizations where these productivity tools are not available to them. And it kind of reminds me, and we were talking about this previously, having lived through the beginning of the internet and how organizations consumed the internet in those early days. And I remember conversations within businesses where decisions were being made, which of the people that are employed should have access to the internet. And if we fast forward now to 2024, we, I think, all recognize that that is a strange concept to try to pick the 2 or 3 people that might benefit from having access to the internet. One of the things that we are working on, and what you see here, this risk-based AI analysis, is something that we created here in Minnesota, that our team created ourselves. So this is not an existing framework, but one that we are really huge proponents of, is categorizing artificial intelligence along levels of risk, if you will. And if you go through it, from level 1 to level 5. Level 1, really is chatbots, things that are intended to bring assistance to service areas, but relatively, low controversy. Level 2, partial automation, and working your way all the way up to level 5, full automation and decision-making made by AI algorithms. I think we're gonna see a period over the next 18 to 24 months where we're going to have so many opportunities in the level 1 and 2 areas. So not creating new large language models on unknown data sets, but really a lot of opportunities to improve the services that government provides, whether it's in the areas of fraud detection or forecasting, turning around services faster, providing better customer experience tools that are able to interpret complex laws in a way that citizens can interact with in multiple languages. I think we're gonna have so many level 1 and level 2 opportunities. And the reason we want to categorize this is that it's important to not lump everything together. As I said, in the beginning, we certainly have to be very mindful and respectful of the dangers of AI while seeking out the opportunities that it provides. And many of those opportunities are pretty immediate and now. And we really aim to bring those opportunities to state government as quickly as we can in as safe and transparent a manner as we can. So now, maybe changing gears just a little bit. That was a little bit of background information. This now moves a little bit into some of the work that we have been doing in the executive branch and within Minute. We have a team that we refer to as TIGA, stands for Transparent Artificial Intelligence Governance Alliance. And that team really works in a collaborative fashion together with our Technology Advisory Committee across the executive branch. We just recently had an event that over 1,000 employees joined that was really just intended to teach more, walk through some examples of what the tools may mean, and I think we'll have another one in a month or two, and I'm quite confident there will be another 1,000 people, as people are very eager to understand what do these tools mean and how can I use them in a responsible and safe way to improve the work that I do. And this Tiger group has really been working for a year, for quite some time, to put together the right framework around this important topic to make sure that we do it in a safe and responsible way, but also in a very progressive way. I'd like to share with you our vision for AI, and it's one that we've had a lot of conversations and discussions about, but it's very important for us, and I think it's we're at a very crucial and critical as an executive branch, as government inflection point related to this technology. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just read that vision statement. Minute embraces the transformative potential of AI and automation. We will seek to responsibly incorporate these technologies into the fabric of government operations, creating efficient, equitable, and innovative services that benefit every Minnesotan. In the Twin Cities, I'm fortunate to be a part of a larger community of CIOs that really share broadly, and many of these CIOs are CIOs of the largest companies that you would recognize certainly in Minnesota, Mayo Clinic and Best Buy and Ecolabs and Target and 3M and so forth, as well as smaller organizations. And there isn't a single organization that isn't looking to leverage AI in a responsible way to really improve upon the services that they're providing. And certainly I think the opportunity for us in government is so big. From a framework perspective, we really asked our Tiger team to do three things initially, and really I'm proud of the work that they have done in this initial. And these three things were crucial as it serves as the foundation for all AI work that we do that's following. One is policy and standards, and more specifically, and I'll touch on this in a minute, policy that guides what the executive branch and state workers can do in a safe way, and also where the boundaries are. So it was really important to lay out a very clear and concise policy that will continue to evolve and continue to change as this field changes, and that has been completed. The vision that I just shared, along with guiding principles, and then last but not least, the governance framework that really drives how do new AI opportunities come into state government, what scrutiny do they receive, what transparency do we wrap around them, how do we evaluate the efficacy and safeness of these opportunities in a way that is very structured to make sure that we can, with the greatest speed, take advantage of the opportunities that exist, but in a safe way that allows for the right stakeholders, both internal and external, to weigh in on these use cases so that we have a very organized approach to that. From a guiding principles perspective, and I won't go through all of these, I'll just highlight a couple that are really, really important and that we share quite broadly, and one that ties back to one of the slides that I shared earlier is workforce empowerment. We really believe that these tools will be a workforce empowerment. They'll be an incredible complement for our workforce. It'll give them another tool that allows them to summarize large pieces of information quickly, to generate first drafts of information, that allows them to do crucial research and organize, and also really will provide a capability to create deep data views, an AI-based capability that will in some way really multiply the number of data scientists that we have in an organization, even if they're not formal practitioners, because they'll have an ability to create deep insights into data by merely talking to one of these AI generative capabilities. Certainly, the impact on customer experience and on customer services will be large, and internally from an operational perspective, our ability to use and leverage these tools from a cybersecurity perspective to make sure that we have the best AI capabilities that are looking for threats and risks that are associated with the technology that government provides, as well as in areas where we can enhance the way we do fraud detection and the way that we do forecasting and the way that we continue to evolve some of those important service areas. Our standard, which I think there's a link that is provided in here, covers all executive branch workers and really I think can be summed up in a couple of ways. One, it encourages employees to explore some of these tools in a safe way. It clearly sets some guardrails, no personally identifiable information into any of these tools. So use these tools, don't put any personally identifiable information in these tools, and don't allow these tools to make any final decisions. And certainly the verbiage, within the policy is much deeper, but those three are really the, I think, overarching. Encouraging our workforce to explore, learn more about how these tools can help you. Don't put any personally identifiable information into a tool until we deem it to be safe and ready to do so. And then make sure that these tools are not making any final decisions, that a human is always at the intersection of making all final decisions. So create drafts and then modify from there. And then last but not least is the governance model that I refer to. And it really, in its most simplistic form, is intended to create a clearinghouse for AI-related processes and opportunities. I think we're going to see a number of different things come at state government that are very complex, and they're going to come at other organizations as well. As you know, the breadth and size of state government is quite large. Our application portfolio is 2,800 line of business applications that really power the business of state government, everything from how you may get a pass to one of our state parks to how you apply for unemployment insurance, the types of technologies that the Department of Health uses, the way we do bridge inspections at the Department of Transportation. Very, very complex. And the tapestry of vendors and suppliers that we have that power many of those applications is quite large as well. And so a number of things that we're going to see and that we're going to have to be prepared for is, one, most all organizations that are vendor suppliers in the technology space are looking to put AI into their tools in some way, shape, or form. And so we have to have an ability to quickly assess the safety of the AI innovation that is happening in the product space of things that we already own. And then as importantly, or more importantly, is proactively looking for opportunities, really proactively challenging the way we work and looking for opportunities to safely inject AI capabilities into the fabric of what we're doing to really make sure that we're meeting constituents and government services, meeting constituents where they are and improving the efficiency of how those government services are provided. Madam Chair, that concludes my presentation. I think I was going to hand it over, but I could also stand for questions first. Defer to you.
Questions from the members, and I have some, but I'm going to call on the members first. Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome, Commissioner. Thank you for your presentation. Towards the end of your presentation, you made a comment about always having a person in charge. Now, if we go to the risk-based AI analysis, there's the 5 levels that are listed there. And level 5 it talks about full automation, and that is where systems can analyze the data, make decisions without any type of human intervention. Are you saying that that is a situation we should never get to or never allow to happen?
Commissioner Thomas.
Madam Chair, Senator Weber, that's a great question. No, I don't think I would be making that inference by way of example. I think we're going to see AI opportunities in cybersecurity where we absolutely want the automation and the AI capability of something analyzing a risk and taking proactive measures to protect us, probably to be on the forefront of where a human may come after that decision is already made, and obviously there are many reasons to do so. I think the biggest point behind that risk-based, that framework that we want to present is as AI capabilities come up in our governance model, we want to tag them along that risk framework so that appropriate stakeholders, really can engage at the levels that they want to, and also to differentiate a little bit between the level 1 and level 2 opportunities and the level 5 opportunities. And so I do think, there'll be times in state government where we want to get to level 5 quite quickly, the cybersecurity example that I referenced. But that governance framework is really intended to protect us, that when an opportunity comes up, it'll be labeled as such, and then the transparency and making sure that people have an opportunity to weigh in on those important decisions.
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Along that line, Commissioner, at some point, we've always been the understanding that any type of analysis only as good as the information, the data that's inputted in the first place. Do you see a situation where someone internally could manipulate the information input into a system that would guarantee the output that they wish to have, not necessarily that's the best or that the people, the public necessarily wants, but in an effort to sway government to bring about their desired result?
That's
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Senator Weber. That's a pretty enormous hypothetical, and so responsibly, I think I would answer with I could envision that. I think one of the things that this is a little bit more of a personal opinion, is we will have to continually assess the opportunities that AI represents and the risks associated with that, with the risks that we currently have in the way we currently work. And certainly, from the example that you gave, even with the people loop, that type of a risk exists. I remember long ago, 10 years ago, I had a chance to be a part of a worldwide study on autonomous vehicles, and the question really centered around, do autonomous vehicles have to be perfect in order to really gain mass adoption, or do they only have to drive better than people? And at the moment that they drive better than people, lives started being saved. And I think, we're going to have similar decisions that, certainly not from a technology perspective, from a larger, obviously with the legislature and many other stakeholders, just related to what the opportunity and the risk and what that balance represents.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions from members at this point before mine? Senator Nelson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Such an interesting presentation, so timely. I just have one question that, well, no, I have lots of questions, but the one that I'm just trying to wrap my mind around is the policy framework, which I think makes so much sense to explore safely, but no personally identifiable information. We kind of know what that information basically is typically that we would not use in any type of exploring AI. But my question is, AI, even though you wouldn't put in PIN, personally identifiable information, it's highly likely that if you're actually using it as a tool in determining some complicated question or outcome, AI would figure out who the person or the identified person is. And I'm just wondering how you protect against that.
Commissioner Thomas.
Madam Chair, Senator Nelson, one of the things in that policy will continue to evolve. Right now, generally, what's available to organizations and certainly to government is, what's referred to as these public generative models. And by way of example, if we think about a kid that is in our child welfare system and, may have, 15 or 18 years worth of case notes. What the policy is intended to do is don't put those case notes, because this is a really unbelievable opportunity of these generative tools. Don't put those case notes into a generative tool and ask it to summarize it. And it could do that, and it would do that quite successfully. But because these are public generative tools, we don't want to expose any of that personal information to these generative tools, not knowing how long, that information would live there. So we just, as a matter of policy. Very quickly, though, over the next, probably 12 to 18 months, we're going to have Minnesota state government specific generative tools where we control what's in them and are the only caretakers of the data, including making sure that appropriate deletion of existing data. At that point in time, the ability to potentially summarize large volumes of information that do have personally identifiable information could become possible. But all of those types of use cases would come through that governance process. And so, what we will do is we will do everything that we can to present the vision and the opportunities, but of course, the governance framework and the transparency associated is intended to make sure that we safeguard, that the data is protected as much as possible, that the efficacy of the language model that is used to train on is free of bias or as free of bias as possible. I hope I answered your question.
Madam Chair.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you. You did. And then just one final point to that. So then any of the state uses of this would not allow one of the newest things recently, which is, if you're late to the Zoom meeting or Teams meeting, you can have your AI assistant give you the update of what happened in the meeting. I'm assuming that's not going to be used either then?
Commissioner Thomas.
Madam Chair, Senator Nelson, those types of tools and capabilities, and I'm going to stay away for a moment of calling them by name, just, to stay out of the vendor branding
Yes.
space. We do expect to come to state government within the next 12 to 18 months. But those capabilities are on that inside side, if you will. They're using a government tenant that we use currently. And so those types of capabilities that are a productivity boost, I'm late, summarize this meeting, create action items out of this meeting, that really gets heavily at those productivity gains that I referenced from earlier related to our workforce. Those will come as opportunities to government quite quickly.
Excuse me,
Senator Nelson.
final question, but so how will any personally identifiable information be exempt from that type of catch me up?
Commissioner Thomas.
Madam Chair and Senator Nelson, so those productivity tools fall into kind of the larger communication and collaboration space that is really centered around the employee and employee meetings and other things. And the tools that are used to support those are not public tools, if you will. Those are tools that are completely under the control of the state of Minnesota as it relates to protecting information, protecting data, and as such, probably fall in line with the rest of the 2,800 line of business applications that already house that personally identifiable information that have received, all this security scrutiny in terms of how we protect that information.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Drazkowski, and I'll keep my question short and at the end because we have the corrections bill to take up and we still have some more testifiers. Senator Drazkowski, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Sure.
Thank you, Commissioner Tomes. So with the productivity gains, Commissioner, is government going to be able to track those gains, monitor them, and then have the ability to apply that gain in productivity to reducing the workforce so that we can save money?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Senator Drazkowski, I think, from my vantage point, I think what we generally encourage is those business-led KPIs or key performance indicators, if you will. How long does it take to receive a driver's license? How long does it take to receive your, license tabs? And I think, from what we see from a capacity perspective, there's an enormous amount of work that exists across state government. I would expect, any large organization to always continue to monitor how the workforce, is utilized and how that relates to those key performance indicators and measurements. I think, the idea for many of the digital capabilities that we see across state government is A, to improve the citizen experience. Where we can provide a digital self-service capability where a person in Minnesota, whether they're visiting or living here, can transact on their own time, around the clock, when it's convenient to them, and receive the things that they need. And then also to drive, those opportunities for government to do things in the most efficient and effective manner.
Senator Jaskowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Commissioner, while I appreciate that, really the core of the question is, can government track, monitor, and chart the productivity gains and changes so decision makers can make decisions around things like, the size of our government? If we're going to have huge productivity gains, it would seem we wouldn't need, at least for some of us, believe that maybe we wouldn't need government to be as big anymore. But it shouldn't be really the role of government to decide how big it is at that point, but it should be the role of government to provide the data so that decision makers can make that call. Is that going to be tracked by you or your agency, the gains in productivity that this technology is going to bring along so that future decision makers can have that information? Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Senator Drazkowski, I think, not to defer that question at all, because I think it's a very valid question. I would say in many spaces that currently exists, each of our lenses is a little bit different. At the conclusion of every session, I see, hundreds, if not thousands of laws change that require a significant amount of work to, really enact the things that, now live in statute and deliver programs. And certainly, I think the evaluation of, how a workforce operates is something that each of the agencies does currently, and I would, certainly defer to the business leaders in each of those areas to provide and put forth, their view and expectation of what does it take to deliver on programs. Right now, as many of you are aware, we're standing up, enormous programs, paid family medical leave, a new agency, Department of Children, Youth, and Families. And I would defer to those business leaders really to provide information related to the workforce that's needed to successfully deliver those programs. There's certainly a connection and information and data related to how long does it take to receive, certain services, and what does it take to actually, from a workforce perspective, to make those services available.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. And Madam Chair, members, I think we heard that government's appetite for monitoring this is not very high and will not be very high. And it reckons back to the advent of computer technology that I've seen in my lifetime around government, and each step of the way, and improvements and technology and adaptations in the agencies of more and more technology. The promise of increase in productivity came with it and sold it, and then there was never really an analysis and any ability for action by decision makers to sometimes right-size government in order to fit the government around the additional productivity that was there. So, I guess for us to ask government that is, we would expect the answer we got. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Putnam.
Thank you, Chair Rest. Just as a sort of antidote or corollary to my Luddite friend over here talking about technology. Commissioner, is it fair to say that while AI might be a large thing, a large technological innovation with significant cultural consequences, that those cultural and practical consequences are specific to contexts or spheres. So when we say AI in government, that's a pretty big umbrella. But there's likelihood that in particular jurisdictions or areas in government, AI is going to manifest differently than it would in others. So are there areas in particular where you think that perhaps Senator Drazkowski's concern for greater efficiency are more likely to occur sooner than others?
Commissioner.
Madam Chair, Senator Putnam, I think when we, look at the space in general, and I think this is, probably a pretty broad shared market view, I think the ability to summarize information is a pretty significant opportunity. So the ability to, distill large amounts of information. Certainly the customer experience piece is probably going to be at the forefront of opportunities, and it'll manifest itself in just an ability to talk to what we now see as a virtual assistant, but much more intelligent. An ability to, as soon as a law is passed, to train a AI capability on the law that's passed, and then have that be able to converse with constituents, and you can ask it, questions of, eligibility or, relevance, or where should I go, or how should I point to? So I think we'll see those opportunities much faster. I think we're going to see, as Senator Nelson pointed out, some of those more tangential core workforce productivity capabilities that are kind of pervasive in the communication and collaboration spaces that will bring some opportunities just related to summarizing actions, tasks coming out of meetings, just that, kind of more broader productivity, the ability to generate first drafts of things. And so I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to have a period in the next 12 to 18 months where, there are going to be quite a few low-hanging fruits, and our ability, and they're going to be in a kind of a safe space. They're not going to be, I don't think, the incredibly controversial ones, and I think, we're going to continue to carefully assess. I do think the use of it will be very different across, the variety of lines of business that government transacts.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Senator Putnam. Remark is not so much a question as an observation that what Minute has been working on and the authority that it is asserting is over state agencies, is over state government. There are three branches of government. These policies that you have developed in your document, which you have, in a sense, summarized here, I hope not using AI, but your own here. But the legislature is immune unless we find ways to latch on to work that's already been done so that we do not have to repeat it. There are some of us, Senator Dibble is one of them, I'm one of them from the past, who's been involved in confidential groups that are dealing with cybersecurity relative to the Capitol, and real security, physical security relative to the Capitol. We have on the TAC, we have a couple of legislators. One of them is a senator, Senator Wicklund. We have no input to your agency other than to receive reports and to ask our questions. And certainly the judiciary does not have that. Neither does the independent constitutional officers. And it seems to me that one of the big challenges we're going to have is how do we integrate the technology without violating the independent missions of each group. And I think that's a huge challenge, and probably the most is for the judiciary. And I'm not talking about making decisions, I'm talking about the way in which their employees act on information within the judicial branch or produce information. And one of my goals is to raise that kind of awareness because it doesn't take legislation. It takes political will to work together to come up with policies that make sense, that protect the independence of the different branches of government, and then within that recognizes the authority of our individual constitutional officers. So that is, it's not going to happen tomorrow, even though we have documentation and so forth and research, whatever, from your agency that I find mind-blowing, and I appreciate it so much. But it's just a beginning, and yet Minnesota is certainly not behind. We are right there with other states that are struggling with these issues, and it's not just a matter of making more penalties for people that violate our personal space, our personal privacy, and punish the bad guys. There's so much more that is eye-opening, that is possible for us, and I really do appreciate what Minute is doing to have us look at it right now, and not, as we so often do, kick the can down the road. So with that inelegant phrase, gentlemen, I appreciate your being with us this morning, and I'm going to ask Commissioner King and Commissioner Ho if they would now join us.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members.
Gentlemen, welcome to the committee. If you would identify yourself for the record, we're interested in your presentation and your testimony.
Thank you. My name is Rick King. I'm the chair of the Technology Advisory Council, and I also chair the Metropolitan Airports Commission.
Indeed.
Hello. Thank you, Madam Chair, members. My name is Lee Ho. Today I'm representing the Technology Advisory Council as a member, as well as being co-chair of the Artificial Intelligence Subcommittee. I'm also the Deputy Commissioner at the Department of Revenue.
Thank you, gentlemen. Commissioner King.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. There's two things that I wanted to tell you about, and I'll accelerate through the first one. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the Technology Advisory Council, and then I want to shift to what that group does and is doing relative to artificial intelligence. First, I'll just say that in my career, I retired after 20-plus years at Thomson Reuters. I was the CIO, among other titles there during that time, 40-year career in IT, so I go back to before the time that the TRS-80 computer was the little baby on the footsteps there. This has led me to a lot of conclusions and experience over time, and particularly at Thomson Reuters, where many of you may be familiar with Westlaw, the legal research product, which has been using different forms of AI for over that whole period of time, and also a product used in many communities for security clearances and so forth, called Clear, not the airport Clear, but a different name of Clear that is used by law enforcement to identify people. Again, that has been using different forms of AI for over 20 years. So we're talking about a technology that isn't exactly new, but it continues to evolve, and the evolution that brings us the generative AI is the real breakthrough. A little bit about the TAC. It was created by the legislature. All of you were part of that. 15 members appointed by the governor, 6 agency people from state, usually the commissioner or the deputy, 6 experts from the public and private sector, so you think academia or private CIOs, people that represent the county, state employee union, and private business, and then one from each party and each of the houses of the government. The chair mentioned Senator Wickland. Senator Cran is also on the committee, as are Representative Bonner and Representative Nash. And we get a lot of attendees from other legislators as well, including recently Senator Rest, when she found out that we were talking about AI in that group. So if we look at the work in the subcommittees, previously up until the middle of last year, our subcommittees were cybersecurity, moving from a project mindset to a product mindset, kind of a lifelong commitment to the products that you're created. User experience and self-service. This is the area where we have been pushing hard to think of the people in the state that interact with technology as customers, not as just anything else. So very business-like there. And then a sustainable funding group. The sustainable funding we put on pause for now because we are thinking that the group has plenty of funding. It's making sure that we're using the funding effectively and can get some good results out of it. But we did spin up an artificial intelligence subcommittee, and Lee will talk to you a little bit about that later. He is one of the co-chairs of that group. We engage with the governor's office, with legislators, with Minnesota IT, with the agencies and their CIOs, with local and county government, with the private sector, with academia. We talk to the reservation folks as well. So it's a broad spectrum that we're trying to represent and take care of in this area. To the chair's earlier comment about the other branches and the other constitutional officers, I think this is a very interesting situation because when cyber security became a real significant thing with the TAC focusing heavily on it, I reached out to each of the constitutional officers and each of the legislative bodies that control the IT side and to the court system just to say, look, we know this legislation covers the TAC in terms of the executive branch, but if you want to liaise on anything, if you want to stay in touch with things, we would do that. And I think our opportunity to continue to offer that in terms of exercising that with AI is strong. And I don't think it requires any legislation. I think it requires some will. And I can tell you the TAC is very interested in doing that. And I'm representing a lot of the private entities that are CIOs in different corporations around our area that believe that they can add a lot to any of the government organizations. Speaking of that group, if you look at the membership, you can see the companies that are represented there. We just finished a round of reappointments with some of the agency folks, myself and our state labor person who's from the organization NAPE. So we have quite a strong group. We meet monthly, subcommittees meet in between the regular meetings monthly. Most of them are online. I welcome you all to join anytime. If you want information about that, simply engage with my friend here on my right, Brandon Hirsch. So the next slide covers the kind of collaboration that we do with different groups. I don't really want to spend too much time there. I'll just say it's broad, it's wide, and it can expand to other things that are necessary. Our goal is to make sure that the state is using technology to its fullest, and we do have concerns that when you invest in certain things, you should see some return. To some questions here from members earlier. We're very supportive of the kind of dashboards that do exist in the state government that show the kind of results that are going on. And we love the idea of having organizations actually improve their throughput so that, let's say, that they have headcount that could be applied to areas where there isn't enough headcount. So I think in total, there are constraints on how the organizations can move headcount around to the broadest area That's something I would do as a CIO if I had an area that wasn't, that I had too many people in, and another area where I needed more, I would be able to do shifting, even if it was across budget lines. So there's some constraints that some of our agency heads encounter there. I think the recommendation page, I just want you to know some of the things that we've done. We were part of the group that was helping define the Legislative Commission on Cybersecurity, helping define cybersecurity as critical infrastructure. As I said earlier, thinking about customer focus as being the prime thing for user experience, moving to this product idea versus project. So that's a very important thing in the service. We created something called the Modernization Playbook, which allows people, as they're looking at different technologies they have, to follow a routine to help modernize that technology so they don't have to learn how to do that again. They can ask the right questions and so forth. And then helping procurement become simpler and faster, and then all the ongoing needs to try to make it clear that the initial investment in new tools and technology is just the beginning. You've got to have enough to maintain and support and go forward. Now I want to turn the focus of the TAC to AI a little bit. I'll say a few things and then I'll turn over to Lee. We really identified in the middle of the year a heightened focus on AI. I asked the director of AI and our R&D labs at Thomson Reuters to come and talk to us in the middle of the year 2003. Madam Chair, I think you have that presentation. If you don't, I'm happy to share that one. That one doesn't have a copyright on it.
Thank you.
The other one that did have a copyright,
And I think you
want
meant
you to know-
2023, right?
2023, yeah.
You said 2003, but
I'm sorry,
Yeah, not
2023.
20 years ago.
Thank you for the correction.
just last week,
Time
just
flies,
last fall.
but not that fast, right? I shared that Wall Street Journal article, and I assumed it was for educational purposes, and therefore it was exempt from the copyright standard. So that was my rationale. Anyway, sorry about that. That was a really good presentation. I recommended to you it sort of a AI 101, and that is what we were looking for there. And we've had other discussions with AI technology experts and usability experts during the time, and we've had the minute policy briefing. And I'll say what Commissioner mentioned earlier, he, most often, anytime they're talking about policy and things like that, they bring it to the TAC for advice in the making. So we don't get shown a policy that's complete. We get shown a policy that they're thinking about. We get asked for advice along the way. I would just say that much like earlier, great opportunities exist with implementing AI. So I think the broadest way to look at it is some controlled experiments as we learn more about it with the bigger, broader guardrails there. And I think the Commissioner is off to a really good start there. I think that makes a lot of sense for other people to look at the same thing. I can say that as we look at AI at the airport, we have the same kind of policy guidelines, the same kind of guardrails, the same kind of concerns. So it's very analogous to what the chair was saying relative to how about the legislature, how about the courts. But I think the commonality of what various states are doing and what this state is doing is very applicable to any of the bodies here. This is a big shift, I think, only insofar as the generative AI. So many of us were first introduced to generative AI if we watched the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. We'll all remember HAL and how ultimately the people there felt like they were in control of this great machine, but ultimately the machine took over. And then I think the movie went to places that I still don't understand as I watch it. But the idea in people's minds about the guardrail is how do we keep HAL from happening again? That's the thing. And I think that Commissioner had that in some of those levels that he discussed, and I think Senator Weber made some comments about it too. And I'll just say, for a number of years, and I've flown in these aircraft simulators, an aircraft can land by itself. It has, most of them have at least 3 redundant computers in them, some of them have 5. They can land without any interaction from the pilot at that point in time. And thankfully, when visibility is really low, that's maybe a good thing. But the pilots are both there, and they can take over at any point that there's something amiss. And that's what I think that level is. Before we go to full automation, it's that watching. And I think the danger in the auto-drive cars is that the people aren't there monitoring like a pilot is. They're thinking, I don't have to drive anymore, I can read my email or something like that. We're not at the stage where you can just hands off and forget it. We will be maybe someday, but we're not as it is today. So with that, I'm going to thank you for taking the interest in this as a committee. I think it's very, very forward-thinking, and I hope that things that you consider going forward focus on what one of the members said in the questioning about the data. It is the data that goes into AI that brings it to conclusions. So much like data today, if there's bad data and somebody takes it as a fact, a bad decision could come out of that. That may or may not be manipulation, it'd just be by mistake. AI would do the same thing, only it would do it faster. Lee?
Thank you, Commissioner. We'll hear from Commissioner Ho, and then if there are some questions, we will take a few minutes. Since we started late, this committee is going to grab that time back at the end of our hearing, so we'll have plenty of time to discuss the bill we have in front of us. Commissioner Ho.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As Chair King mentioned, the TAC has a pretty strong
Commissioner,
interest in...
you need to identify yourself for the tape.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. My name is Lee Ho. I'm a member of the Technology Advisory Council and co-chair of the Artificial Intelligence Subcommittee. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. As Chair King had mentioned, the TAC has a very strong interest in artificial intelligence, primarily because it's looking at the opportunity to improve government service as well as the challenges of integrating new technology. Both of those are strong interests of the TAC. The Subcommittee on Artificial Intelligence is only beginning its work, and so today what I'd like to do is introduce you to the subcommittee as well as talk about some of its early work and what's planned ahead for the committee. So as you can see from the membership, my co-chair is Tom Butterfield. He's a former senior technology executive for TCF Bank as well as Target. On the committee itself is also Representative Jim Nash as well as Teresa Wise, who's a former technology executive for Delta Airlines. I'm also honored to have the Assistant Commissioner Tim Lineau from Public Safety, as well as Deputy Commissioner Evan Rowe from the Department of Employment and Economic Development joining us. The subject of artificial intelligence also has broad interest among other TAC members, and so we often see Chair King as well as Vice Chair Vince Kamenszag there at these meetings, as well as other members of the TAC, including several of the legislative members. We've recently had Chair Rest join us as well as Representative Steve Elkins. So this has very broad participation. In addition, a lot of the leadership for a minute is regularly attending these subcommittee meetings, including the commissioner, deputy commissioner, legislative director, as well as their leader in the artificial intelligence space. I'm also pleased to see interest from the Office of Legislative Auditor, because I believe that strong internal controls is also a key element to managing successfully the risks associated with artificial intelligence. In December, we brought this group together to really talk about what are the key topics for the organization and things people need to look at. And what we heard were strongly, folks really wanted a better understanding of what is artificial intelligence. Also, what are the opportunities that it might provide to state government, as well as what are the challenges in using it responsibly? And those are the key focus topics brought by the members as well as participants in that meeting. based on the feedback that we got, we really started looking at, how do we track and monitor the evolution of artificial intelligence? Because as we know, it's an emerging technology. It's not one that's fully formed. And so it's something where we would need to really watch trends and adapt our agendas as we need based on the changing technology. We also really wanted to look at providing guidance to state agencies who are interested in adopting artificial intelligence. And so this is where the subcommittee would work with the TAC and with Minute in order to provide the best guidance to state agencies who are interested in using artificial intelligence applications. More recently, we've been focused on educating our members as well as others who are participating in the subcommittee. And in January, we brought in Gartner, which is an internationally recognized consulting firm that advises many organizations worldwide on technology, practices, and products, and had them talk to us about what's the evolution of artificial intelligence, where is it going, how are organizations using it. What we learned at that time is that many organizations are starting to look at artificial intelligence, but their initial interest in it is really looking at more administrative or back office operations, as well as areas where they might be able to improve customer service. So the transformational use of artificial intelligence at this stage is small and really with more leading organizations. But the vast majority of them are really looking at internal operations more than they're looking at transforming services. What's planned ahead is in February or later this month, our plan is to have Minute come talk to the group about what it's doing at the enterprise level to plan ahead for artificial intelligence applications by state agencies and to help us better understand how state government is currently moving forward with artificial intelligence. And so that's our current topic, and we plan to bring other organizations in the future to really talk more about how they're using artificial intelligence or how they're approaching it within their organizations, so we can identify if there's a framework we can put together for state agencies and to help guide the progress and the application of these technologies. So if I was going to summarize where we're at, we are all about looking at the opportunities for state government, as well as really looking at how we can best manage the application of artificial intelligence. In addition, we want to make sure we're coordinating with the other bodies, whether it's other agencies or Minute, in order to help provide the best guidance possible to state agencies and the TAC. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, gentlemen, commissioners, and chairs. Are there questions or comments, either for information about the TAC or what they're doing? Anyone? Well, I want you to know how much I've appreciated being welcomed as a visitor and interested party, and I will continue to be present at your meetings as I can. I do think that unlike Minute itself, you have taken on part of your mission is reaching out to the other, truly intentionally involving legislators and other parts of government in your and businesses to inform, instruct, make wiser, however you want to characterize it, how technology is going to impact government, but also the lives of everyday citizens, which we know already happens, even if we have very low self-awareness of how that comes about. Any further comments? Thank you very much, and we will be, all of you and Commissioner Thomas there, Brandon, we will be tracking you and hope to be very much involved as a discussion about who, what, and how artificial intelligence is going to affect not only executive branch employees, including their reaching out to improve their again, my 3 E's, their efficiency, their effectiveness, and their efficaciousness. That should not be limited to employees of the executive branch. Our employees, the ones that are in this room, should become and should get training. How are we going to manage that to allow them that same opportunity, and that it is not a silo. It is not a silo around state agencies, but is a communications process and is a training process. And it does take training. It is not something that we should expect our employees to do when they would, on the time when they are not under our employ. It's not, well, you can do this if you feel like it, you know, it's like an extracurricular activity. It should not be that way. It should be our responsibility to make those opportunities possible, available, under the rubric of job opportunities on the job. And I hope that our leaders will come together, both houses, both parties. It's not a matter, it's obviously not partisan, or at least to me it's not, of how our employees become better servants of the people of Minnesota. And I know that sounds maudlin, but nevertheless, that is what the impact is. So thank you very much for being with us today, and I've got your contact information. I know where you live. So thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us today. Members, the second item on our agenda is House File, no, I guess it's Senate File? You don't have, Senate File 2405, Senator Klein, before he begins, it's in your packet. Senate File 2405 is a vehicle. The original content of 2405 was adopted in the 2023 tax bill and signed by the governor. So what we have before us is a delete-all amendment that Senator Klein will explain in just a moment, but what it attempts to do is, and I think accomplishes, is to deal with one fiscal issue, the mistake made with the information provided by the Department of Revenue with regard to adopting our provisions dealing with the standard deduction, and then a couple of other items that are more minor ones, but they indeed are extremely important to the populations that they impact. And then there is one that we'll discuss separately, but that is not part of the bill, and I'll have, with Senator Klein's permission, I'll have more to say about that later. So Senator Klein, this is not an author's amendment. I'm going to call on you to offer it, but then we have to take a vote. It's not pro forma. Senator Klein moves the adoption of the A7. Ms. Pollack, is that correct? That's correct. Of the A7 amendment. Is there discussion, or shall we adopt it? Seeing none, no discussions, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. The motion prevails, and the A7 amendment is adopted. Senator Klein, we now have Senate File 2405 as amended before us.
Thank you, Madam Chair and fellow members. Thank you for hearing Senate File 2405 as amended by the A7 today, and I thank the co-authors on the bill, Senators Weber and Senator Nelson. There were 3 technical corrections that were inadvertently passed into law in the tax omnibus last year. I will briefly summarize what 2405 as amended corrects. First of all, the 2023 tax bill inadvertently referenced 2019 standard deduction amounts rather than the inflation-adjusted amounts that should exist for tax year 2024. Tax chairs and the commissioner released a statement when the mistake was noted, clarifying the intent of the 2023 bill and promising to correct the issue early in 2024. As a result, the Department of Revenue has not yet adjusted withholding tables to reflect current law, and MMB did not calculate this mistake in its November forecast. However, if not corrected, 2.3 million tax filers would be subject to additional taxes in tax year 2024. That correction makes up sections 1 through 3 of the bill as amended. The second issue is a provision for a local sales tax in Beltrami County. In the 2023 bill, we approved language allowing a local sales tax authorization. And the voters of Beltrami County went to the polls in November of 2023 to approve a 0.625% local sales tax. Under current law, an odd-year election is considered a special election, thereby marking the approval void. The amendment that you have just voted on stipulates that the election results from that specific date are considered valid, and allow the tax change to take effect. Madam Chair, the last provision of the bill as amended is statewide housing aid to tribal governments. The 2023 tax bill allowed 7 specific tribal nations to receive annual statewide local housing aid. The DE amendment allows any of the state's 11 federally recognized tribal governments to apply for the aid. It also adjusts the payment schedule for tribal nations so that aids are certified by August 1 and paid in one lump sum on December 27th of the same year, rather than in 2 payments the year following certification. That provision, members, is contained in Section 5 of the bill. The Beltrami County taxes are contained in Section 6 of the bill. And Section 7 of the bill also pertains to the tribal nations aid. And with that, Madam Chair, I'm open to any questions on the bill.
I will point out before your questions begin that the 3 provisions that are in the bill are all different. They are not mistakes of the same kind or understandings of the same kind, and yet we are correcting all of them. Please keep that in mind. Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are going to revolve around the item that is not included in there, and
Okay.
perhaps if you wish to speak to that first, I'm certainly willing to wait with mine.
I would like to have other people speak first, and we do have a testifier who is also interested in what's not in the bill. Okay, then. So what is in, I'm going to speak then, all
Okay.
right? So I am very disappointed that the administration did not see fit to recognize an error and its obligation to support us in correcting it. They were fully informed for the last 6 months through letters of chair's intent about what should have been in the bill. We don't expect taxpayers to rely on intent. They do so, as we have learned, at their own peril. And that certainly happened here. There are 2 letters, however, that deal with both the net operating loss deduction, which has in it a effective date error that both Representative Gomez, the chair of the House Tax Committee, and I take full responsibility for, and we'll do our best, although there's no reason for anybody in this room to believe me, because I thought I was doing my best. That didn't happen. It's not in this bill. So in a bit, in some ways, I feel free. I can say anything, and you don't have to believe me, and I don't have to be telling the truth, because nobody's holding me to it, and certainly not the administration. But we did inform the administration, like we usually do in these circumstances, that an error had occurred, and the language says in both letters, both about the standard deduction, which the department did not discover until a month after the bill passed, and the NOL, which was discovered almost immediately, that it is our intention, or would be our intention, to address it and fix it as quickly as possible. We're doing one here, or presenting to you one here, and we are not the other. But Representative Gomez and I are, along with Representative Leslie-Gard, are going to be working, and I hope other members of the Senate Tax Committee, to address the unfairness of not addressing and correcting the $15 million one-time money. It's not ongoing. If you notice from the spreadsheet on the standard deduction, it's an ongoing mistake. It's a huge mistake, and I'm glad that we will fixing that. But just because something is only 15 million and one time, does not make it any less an error to be corrected. So my comments are similar, I think, to the ones that were made by Representative Gomez on Monday afternoon in her committee, and that is my position about the NOL. Now, Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly, to preface my questions and comments this morning, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that I do not hold anyone accountable in this room for what we're dealing with here. I do not blame the chair. I do not blame the author of the bill. I do not blame the department or the commissioner. But I think there's only one office that bears the responsibility for the failure of this correction to be included in this bill, and that is the governor's office, including the governor himself. And it just seems to me that to fail to make this correction, which is a one-time amount of money, as the chair indicated, on the heels of the fact that this legislature and the governor burdened businesses across the state of Minnesota with a number of additional tax liabilities last session, and to now put an additional $15 million on their backs seems to me to be disingenuous when he already has stated that he doesn't want to see any new taxes. Now, I don't know exactly what his reasoning is for not dealing with this issue, but it seems to me that if you are going to fail to make a correction that on an issue that created a new tax, reducing the net operating loss deduction from 80 to 70%, and then let it be implemented a year earlier than it was supposed to be, you have indeed created a new tax. And so he is already in violation of his word as far as I am concerned. I do have a question. It's my understanding, Madam Chair, that there's someone here from MMB.
Mr. Brian Dahl, are you present? If you'd come forward, please. Welcome to the committee. If you'd identify yourself for the record, we're pleased to have you here to answer inquiry from Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Brian Dahl, Financial Planning Director with Minnesota Management and Budget.
Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Dowell, the larger item that was, mistake that was made last year, I think it was in the neighborhood of $352 million as related to the withholding tables. Did MMB allow for the correction of that when the November forecast was prepared?
Mr. Dahl.
Madam Chair, Senator, yes.
Okay. And along those lines, then, why wasn't the $15 million correction, which the chairs had indicated to the department that the department had included on their website that would be made, why wasn't that allowed for in the November forecast?
Madam Chair, Senator, perhaps it would be helpful if I walk through the criteria we use to deviate from standard practice with our forecast.
Mr. Dahl, when you do that, would you please also explain why you, the department, MMB, did not neglected to inform the chairs of the Taxes Committee of that process? Maybe you don't know why, but some of us are asking, why didn't you tell us? Mr. Dahl.
Madam Chair, Senator, on the second question, you're correct. I don't have an answer for you today, but we will make sure to get back to the committee on that question.
I'm afraid the answer is we didn't want them to know. Mr. Dahl.
So, Madam Chair, Senators, I want to walk through sort of our process with each November and February forecast. As you're likely aware, we prepare a current law forecast of state revenues and spending under Minnesota statutes 16A.103. On very rare occasions, which was the case with last November's forecast, the forecast is deviated from current law when certain criteria are met. For a provision in current law to be excluded from the forecast, it must meet 3 tests. First is that the provision of law was clearly a drafting error or oversight, as evidenced by legislative tracking and hearings. The standard deduction and the NOL error both meet that test. The second, the implementation timeline for the law in question allows time for the next legislature to correct the error or oversight before it takes effect. With standard deduction, but not NOL, based on our communication with Department of Revenue, standard deduction, the department has sufficient time and flexibility within statute for the legislature to act to correct the error. Whereas with NOL, the effective date did not allow the flexibility for the department to delay implementing the law. And then the third test is that we've received formal communication from legislative leaders and committee chairs that they intend to address the error at the first opportunity in the next legislative session.
Senator Weber, and then Senator Nelson, did you have your hand up?
Oh, I'll speak.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, it seems to me that certainly the notice of the chair's intent to correct the NOL situation was sent out in the latter part of June of 2023. So everyone certainly should have been well aware that it was the intent to correct that. And since and the reality of it is that I think that the excuse that there wasn't sufficient time to me is fairly weak. Was your office directed by the governor or anyone from his office to intentionally not make that correction in the November forecast? Mr. Dowell?
Mr. Dahl?
Madam Chair, Senator, the answer to that is no, we were not directed by the governor's office. As I walked through, when we prepare the forecast and there are errors like these, we have these criteria, and it's important that our office be consistent in applying those criteria.
Well, quite frankly, and there again, Madam Chair, I am not going to blame anyone that's in this room. I think the idea that, well, we have to now count the $15 million, or would have had to have included the $15 million as a new expense, is a disingenuous argument on the part of the administration. And I think that the correction for this should have been part of this bill. And now, what we're going to see happen is that, well, there's a new bill being drafted that includes that. Well, will that bill receive the same type of urgency that this bill has received? I don't know. Somehow in a non-budget year, tax bills have a way of not happening, unfortunately. Even omnibus bills. That was demonstrated in 2022. And so I just think that it's most unfair to the businesses of this state to have to shoulder another $15 million burden that they should not have to shoulder. And so with that, Madam Chair, I will stop my comments. There will probably be more on the floor.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments?
Over here.
Senator Nelson, did you want to
Yeah,
speak?
yes.
Okay, Senator Nelson and then Senator Driscoll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am deeply disturbed by this. I am trying to choose my words wisely, but it is hard to fathom that correction letters signed by both chairs were effectively part of those letters were ignored. As far as making these corrections, and this is my 15th year in the legislature. There's some of you around here who've been in longer than me. I don't recall this happening where there is a mistake. A mistake is made in the final large bill. It was an error. There are letters from each chair stating an error was made. This is it. Now, and the fact that there were 2 errors made and only one is being addressed and the other is not being addressed. Madam Chair, I admire your restraint in comments here. I think this is very challenging and hard to imagine why the effective date on the NOLs was not included. I don't really understand the parameters as why it was not included in the forecast, seeing that there were the chair's letters. And I would hope going forward that there would be a reconsideration on what must surely be the governor's office. It's certainly not the chair of the tax committee in the Senate or the House. There should be reconsideration of this, folks. To add a $16.9 million tax increase a year earlier because of a drafting error that was addressed and it's not included in the budget, then one has to wonder, where's the additional $16.9 million going to be used? Assuming that the governor does not accept the corrections as provided back in June to the error, is this just going to the bottom line? Where, maybe a financial, maybe you could tell me, where's the additional revenue going to show up?
Madam Chair, Senator,
Mr. Dahl.
I believe you're correct, it's $16.9 million in fiscal year '24. Starting with the end of session statements that MMB published, and then with the November forecast, that revenue was included in our fund statements, and thus is included in the overall revenue picture of the general fund, and thus with a surplus in the current biennium is sitting on the bottom line of the general fund.
Madam Chair.
Senator Nelson.
Thank you. Just to add, we've seen many forecasts over the years, and there are many unusual things that happen. But there's often an asterisk at the bottom that states whatever the unusual situation is. I would ask that in the forecast going forward, the February forecast or next forecast, I should say that as we go forward, that should be an asterisk. Minnesotans should know that. Minnesotans need to know that this early enactment of the NOL language is costing $6.9 million more than was intended by the legislature. And I think it should be looked at in that way. So I would like to see an asterisk as that forecast comes out. I think this is really unconscionable. All in my comments.
Senator Nelson. Senator Drazkowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, first of all, I think you did do your best, and I think you did.
pardon?
I think you did do your best, and I think you did very well. The volume and the veracity with which legislation was coming through at the end of session last year was very, very high, and I commend you on the work you did. So don't take it to heart, if you would, Madam Chair. But I guess I have I have a question for Mr. Dahl and then for Madam Chair. Mr. Dahl, so what is the position of the department? Is the department in favor of correcting this error? It sounds like they acknowledge that it is an error. First of all, does the department and does the governor acknowledge that this is an error?
Mr. Dahl.
Madam Chair, Senator, we acknowledge that both NOL and standard deduction were an error relative to legislative intent.
And so if I could, Madam Chair.
Senator Drazkowski.
Mr. Dahl, is the department's and the governor's position in favor of correcting the error?
Mr. Dahl.
Madam Chair, Senator, I can't speak for the governor's preferences on policy.
Nor should you. I mean, we appreciate that.
Can you speak, Mr. Dahl, on behalf of the agency?
Mr. Dahl.
Madam Chair, Senator, as I walked through in our criteria earlier for deviating from a current law forecast, our role is to reflect current law, and when there's an error and it meets these criteria, we will exclude it from the forecast to give the legislature time to correct the error. Relative to the policy itself correcting the error, I can't speak for our commissioner, but in my role at the department, I don't have a preference one way or another.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl.
Senator Drazkowski.
So, Madam Chair, I'm really confused. I mean, so the discussion's been greatly around the inclusion of this or not in the forecast. I don't think that matters. The question is, are we going to correct the error? And the question I have for you, Madam Chair, is why we are the legislature, we are not the governor, and the governor is not us, nor is the department. So why are we not including it in this bill? I guess I'll just let you answer that, Madam Chair.
Senator Drazkowski, it was communicated to me by the Commissioner of Revenue that the governor opposed it being in the bill, and that and he has opportunities to react to bills that you or I do not have, and so it is not included.
So, Madam Chair, is there time, given this bill and in the process, can we, can we lay the bill over and develop language and put it in the bill? The governor's going to veto this bill because we put a $15 million correction provision in? I don't understand the
I don't speak
thinking.
for the governor. I'm just letting you know what was communicated to me honestly and forthrightly by the Commissioner of Revenue, Representative Gomez, and I both intend to offer a pathway to correction that does not include this bill. I have the Senate jackets here that is one sentence bill, and that is to retroactively move the language of the date, of the effective date from 2023 to 2024. And I am offering the spaces on the bill. People can say yes or no, that I'm indifferent, but to the conferees who, at least 4 of the 5 conferees in the Senate, signed the bill where the error occurred, and if that bill can be introduced by when? By noon, in the hopper by noon, then it'll be on tomorrow's introductions with Representative Lizagard as the House author. Period.
Well, Madam Chair, if I could, if
Senator Drazkowski, if you're asking, am I going to have an amendment to change that or offer it right now, the answer is no. I got the yellow jacket. That's what I'm going to do.
it just seems, Madam Chair, that, we are the legislature, and the leaders that matter in the legislature, you and Representative Gomez in this case, are both in agreement that this was a mistake. It seems like a very easy thing to correct, and I don't see any reason to cower to the governor. And that, just without knowing all the details and not having talked to you, Madam Chair, about this beforehand, that's what it appears to me. I see no reason for the governor, for the legislature to cower to the governor on this. And that's what it appears to me that the plan is to do. Because obviously strategically, the governor appears to be opposed to the $15 million correction. And if so, it would be a strategic misstep to include it separately. So obviously, we should include it as part of this bill in order to get the full package of corrections that the legislature expects to see, and the governor will need to sign the bill. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. Is there any further discussion? Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Dahl. Senator Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Regarding the new bill, for that one sentence bill, has the governor indicated whether he will sign that or not?
I have no idea what his intentions are with regard to this bill. And as far as I know, Representative Lizagard has not asked him, but I don't know the answer to that question.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Oh, of course. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Dahl. We have one testifier on this bill as on the omnibus bill. As you know, it's my practice only to hear from people who oppose it. And I think to the committee, if you'd identify yourself for the record.
Thank you, members. My name is Beth Cadoon. I represent the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. I will keep my comments very short. I was appreciative of all the comments you made here regarding the disappointment regarding the net operating loss effective date fix not being included. We share in that disappointment. I just want to give a little context on who's impacted by the NOL provision. This provision was included, which would reduce the cap, which is currently for federal purposes at 80% as well. Minnesota would now deviate from the federal, moving it to 70%. The understanding was going to be effective for tax year 2024. Obviously, that's the issue that we're debating. The language was put in at tax year 2023. With the tax year 2024, it obviously gives at least taxpayers a little more time to plan for that tax impact. Who tends to use the NOL carry forward provision tends to be startup companies. It tends to be those businesses in cyclical industries. So those are the ones that, even though it's not a big cost overall for the state budget of $15 million, for those taxpayers in those startup companies, this can be an important provision. So thank you for your comments. Thank you for doing the letter of intent and your work on that. I would also mention that when that was sent out in June, the Department of Revenue then did send out notification to taxpayers that they'd received that. That still, information is still on the Department of Revenue's website. If you pull that up, they can say that this is the current law. However, the intent of the tax chairs is to change that. So I do believe taxpayers in good faith have relied on that, would like to see that fixed as soon as possible, because obviously now they'll be having to pay that more tax this year than they expected, as well as filing amended returns. So thank you for your work to see if we can get this fixed.
Any further discussion? Senator Klein moves that Senate File 2405 as amended be recommended to pass. It will go to general orders. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. The record will show, will record Senator Weber's no, and it will record that the chair abstained. The motion prevails, and the bill is on its way. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Senator Driscollsey,
If I
something else?
could, Madam Chair, I don't know that it's proper on a voice vote to call out one individual's difference.
You're quite right. Senator Weber, did you want your vote recorded or not?
I'm perfectly fine with that.
He's perfectly fine with it.
But Madam Chair, it's still not procedurally. I mean, in that case, we may want to go to a voice or to a standing or a raise hands vote or a roll call vote.
I have another suggestion that you indeed are correct, that we will not record Senator Weber's no vote, but we will indeed record my abstention.
Madam Chair, just to note, I abstained as well.
And Senator
That
Nelson.
I did not.
Okay, and Senator Nelson abstains. Otherwise, the bill is passed. There being no further business before this committee, we are adjourned. So did you get that? You will record, you will not record.